the mouth, pharynx, esophagus, stomach. The stomach has a lot of stuff going on here, okay? There's a lot of cells secreting a lot of specific things. Those are things that you should know. There's a few different regions to it as well. You should know those. What is the stomach? It's a muscular sac that holds food, mixes food. It doesn't sound all that impressive. It's what it mixes, how it produces all of this gastric secretions in order to mix the food and facilitate that chemical breakdown of nutrients. In the stomach, we are mixing the bolus of food with the gastric juice, and that helps to turn bolus into chyme. Chyme is like a semi-liquid mass. That's what its definition is. Think of it like watery toothpaste in a tube. That's really what it kind of looks like. It smells, it's disgusting. But it's called chyme. So food turns into a bolus, turns into chyme, C-H-Y-M-E. We have a number of various different gastric glands. Gastric glands have a number of different cells that secrete mucus, hydrochloric acid, intrinsic factor, and some digestive enzymes. These are the cells: mucus, parietal, chief, and G. You should know the names of these cells. You should know what they secrete and what the secretions do. It's definitely going to be on the test. So there you go. There's your hint for the day. Mucus cells, as you might imagine, secrete mucus. It is that easy sometimes. We have mucus cells in a lot of locations. I'm not going to get into where they're all at here, but there's a few different types of mucus cells. Nonetheless, they all produce mucus. Right? Mucus helps to buffer the stomach from being damaged by all that acid. This is a very acidic environment. This is a pH of 2. It's really acidic. So this mucus that gets made here helps to buffer that acid content and prevents the wall from being destroyed by all that acidic juice. If we don't produce enough mucus, as you can kind of see there, we can get a gastric ulcer or a peptic ulcer. It's the same thing. Ulcers are pretty painful. It eats away at the lining of the stomach. It could perforate, go all the way through. If it did that, you're obviously not too healthy to begin with, probably alcoholic in most cases, and you're going to die anyway. So you don't have to worry about it getting fixed. Parietal cells, so mucus cells, mucus. Parietal cells secrete two things: intrinsic factor and hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid helps to break down peptides. Proteins. I'm breaking down the peptide bond. Help to break down proteins. From a digestion standpoint, that's its function. It also helps to kill bacteria, not necessarily a function truly of the digestive system, but it is a nice little byproduct of being such a hugely acidic material that it can kill bacteria. Hydrochloric acid breaks down proteins. Intrinsic factor is necessary for the ability of our bodies to absorb vitamin B12. If we don't produce enough intrinsic factor, like we don't as we get older in life, especially in the elderly, if they don't produce enough intrinsic factor, they do not make or they do not absorb enough vitamin B12. B12 is involved with helping to make red blood cells. So you're going to be very tired and lethargic if you don't get enough B12. B12 is attached to proteins, specifically animal proteins. So what does hydrochloric acid do? Breaks down proteins. What's intrinsic factor do? Helps to remove vitamin B12 from animal protein so I can absorb it later. You can see right there, it secretes hydrogen chloride ions. It doesn't secrete, these cells don't physically secrete hydrochloric acid per se. They secrete the different ions, and then the ions come together and form hydrochloric acid within the belly of the stomach. The third cell we have is chief cell. Chief cell secretes two different things. It secretes gastric lipase. And again, we had lingual lipase. Lingual lipase helps to break down fats secreted by the tongue. So it's in the mouth. Gastric lipase does the same thing. It helps to facilitate the breakdown of fats, but this one is done so here in the stomach, secreted by the stomach, works in the stomach. That lingual lipase that we talked about earlier in the mouth, not doing any action. Here in the stomach, it becomes activated. The high acid content activates the lingual lipase, and here is where it will actually start working. The second secretion that a chief cell does is pepsin. Well, if we want to be specifically it produces pepsinogen. Pepsinogen is inactive. As soon as I release pepsinogen, though, into the stomach, it comes in contact with hydrochloric acid, and then wha-bam, immediately becomes pepsin. Okay? So if you want to put pepsin or pepsinogen, I wouldn't smack you around either way. I would count you right for both of them, okay? Pepsin helps us to break down proteins. Proteins, fat, protein. So proteins is a pretty important thing being broken down here in the stomach. The last cell we have is called G cell. G cell. I'm going to put a fancy word here just to scare y'all. Enteroendocrine. Enteroendocrine. That's its name. It's called the enteroendocrine cells, most commonly referred to as G cells. So let's just call them G cells, because that's going to be a hell of a lot better to spell than enteroendocrine cells. G cells secrete gastrin. G of gastrin, G of G cells. See how easy it is? Sometimes it is that easy. Pepsinogen, pepsin, gastric lipase, hydrochloric acid, intrinsic factor are all enzymatic. Gastrin is a hormone. If I ask you to describe all the secretions of the stomach, you're going to talk about all four of these cells and all of these various different secretions. If I ask you to discuss the enzymes secreted by the stomach, well, now we're just talking about chief and parietal cells. Okay, those are the only ones producing enzymes. Mucus, not really an enzyme per se, it's a buffer. G cells secrete gastrin, and gastrin is a hormone. G cells, gastrin, hormone, what does that hormone do? It basically yells at everybody else to do more work. As I eat more food and more food enters into the stomach, the pH of the stomach gets a little bit more alkaline. It gets buffered by all the stuff being thrown into it, right? So as it goes from a pH of 2 to starts becoming a little bit higher, pH of 3, as soon as we start to get away from acid, high acid, then G cells secrete their gastrin. Gastrin tells all of these cells to do more work. So I get more hydrochloric acid being secreted, and that helps to lower that pH of the stomach back down. So that's what it does. But in the process, I need more mucus because I have more acid being dumped into it. I also have more food being dumped in there, so I have more proteins to break down, more fats to break down, so I need all of these guys. So G cells yell at everybody to do more work. And here's a fun little picture, okay? Here you can see some mucus cells. producing mucus. Here you can see my cheek cells secreting that pepsinogen, and as soon as it comes in contact with hydrochloric acid, I get pepsin. There's your parietal cell. Parietal cells secreting intrinsic factor, secreting hydrogen ions and chloride ions to get me HCl, hydrochloric acid. And then down here are my gastric glands. They're endocrine. Endocrine cells secrete ductless. So they dump their contents into the blood. This hormone travels in the blood, not too dang far. Stimulates this guy to do more work, this guy to do more work, and these guys to do more work. I have it all synopsized for you right here. Mucus cells, parietal cells, chief, G, what they do. It is a question that gets asked on the exam. So I hope you won't be surprised now because of that question. As soon as food starts to enter into the stomach, I don't think I have a picture. As soon as food starts to enter into the stomach, all of a sudden it starts to churn. It starts to get stimulated. Actually, even a little bit before that too. As your stomach gets emptied, right, after a few hours, it'll start. And then as you get hungry, as different receptors start triggering the body to realize, okay, you need to go eat again, it'll start to stimulate that stomach a little bit and start to churn it, okay? And that grumbling of the stomach, that's all those little things rubbing together inside that stomach. That causes some pain. We registered that as, okay, hunger pains, I need to eat something. So it does kind of start moving a little bit, even when nothing's in there, right? When food does enter in that sucker, it really starts to increase peristalsis. Peristalsis, movement, right? And that really helps to churn and mix all that stuff together. Gastric juice, bolus, yada, 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 my kind. All that mechanical breakdown, all that chemical breakdown helps us to break down fats and protein. As you can kind of see, we don't have carbohydrate breakdown occurring here in the stomach. That's happening in other locations. But here we got protein and fat being broken down. Fantastic. Towards the end of the pylorus of the stomach, we have a sphincter called the pyloric sphincter that will contract, and that will prevent all that food stuff, chyme, from exiting out of the stomach. As soon as I'm ready to get it to move from the stomach into the small intestine, it relaxes, and it's like squeezing out toothpaste. A little bit comes out at a time, and it contracts back up. Squeeze a little bit out, contract back up. Like I said earlier, the vast majority of absorption is going to be in the small intestine, but we do have a little bit that happens here within the stomach, and here you can kind of see alcohol absorption occurs here. Aspirin, you can absorb that, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory NSAIDs, all that can occur here. All right. Tiny little bit of fats, but for the most part, nutrient absorption is happening really within the small intestine. pH of the stomach is about 2. That's a little squiggly line means in front of the number there. It means about. It's around 2. If it gets below 2, 1.9, 1.8, 1.7, that's a little bit too strong. Okay. Ideally, we are around 2. Okay. We don't want to get it too high. We don't want to get it too low. Anything acidic is considered anything lower than a pH of 7. Anything alkaline or basic is associated with a greater than 7 pH value. And here's that pH scale. Right? Here's where we're at. Here's gastric juice right here. Right? Here's chyme. Now you can kind of see some foods and their acidity and whatnot. There you can see stomach is super acidic. And then the small intestine you can see is really alkaline in nature. Right? See pancreatic juice and bile has a pH of 8, for gosh sakes. Okay. Yeah. I mean, this is probably important to know. Salivary amylase, it gets secreted in the mouth, helps to initiate carbohydrate breakdown. Once this material gets to the stomach, though, salivary amylase doesn't function in an acidic environment. Obviously, your mouth is not acidic, so it was working there. But here in the stomach, it does not. Lingual lipase becomes active here in the stomach, like I mentioned a little bit ago, and we talked about pepsinogen being converted into pepsin, helping to break down proteins. 4 hours. That's how long food generally stays within the stomach. Okay? That can vary a little bit by how big the meal is. Did you eat high fat or high fiber foods? Those foods are bigger. The molecules are bigger. So it has to spend more time in there as we try to break it down. We don't have enzymes to break down fiber. So it really, that really keeps in there quite a bit as we try to break it down, even though we can't. If you eat sugary foods, it's going to be in there a heck of a lot less time. So it can vary a little bit. It just kind of depends on your nutritional profile of what you're throwing down your throat there. Larger meals take a lot longer to empty than smaller ones. So if you just had a small little snack, obviously that's not going to take a whole heck of a lot of time to break down and have it leave the stomach. So it may only be in there for about an hour or two. So it does vary, but a typical nice nutritious meal should be in there for about 4 hours. That's enough time to get everything broken down.